My husband hired a private detective to follow me. He wanted proof that I was cheating, so he could take the house, the kids, and everything I had built over 12 years of marriage. But 2 weeks into the investigation, the detective didn't call my husband with a report. He called me. And the first sentence out of his mouth made me realize that the man I had been sleeping next to for over a decade was a complete stranger. My name is Vivian Cole. I am 36 years old. I live in a 4-bedroom, craftsman-style house in Lake Oswego, Oregon, a quiet suburb of Portland where the neighbors wave at you in the morning, and the biggest drama is usually about someone's recycling bin being left out too long. I have 2 daughters, Lily, who is 10, and Sophie, who is 7. I run a small but successful interior design studio out of a converted garage behind the house. My husband, or rather, the man I thought was my husband, is Nathan Cole. He is 39, a senior financial consultant at a firm called Greystone Capital downtown. Handsome, charming, and disciplined. The kind of man who irons his shirts on Sunday night, keeps a detailed spreadsheet of household expenses, and always remembers to bring flowers on anniversaries. If you had asked me a year ago to describe my marriage, I would have said stable. Not passionate, not explosive, but stable. We had our routines. He left for work at 7:15 a.m. I dropped the girls at school at 8 o'clock. We had dinner together most nights. On weekends, he coached Lily's soccer team while I took Sophie to her art class. It was the kind of life that looks perfect in a Christmas card. The cracks were there, of course. They always are. But I had trained myself to look past them, the way you train yourself to ignore a slow leak in the ceiling. You put a bucket under it and tell yourself you'll fix it later. The first crack appeared about 2 years ago. Nathan started working late. Not occasionally, but 3, sometimes 4 nights a week. He would come home at 9 or 10 p.m., smelling like coffee and cologne, his tie loosened, his eyes avoiding mine. When I asked about it, he always had a perfectly reasonable answer. Big client presentation, quarterly review, new partner onboarding. I believed him because I wanted to believe him, because the alternative was too terrifying to consider. The second crack was the phone. Nathan had always been casual about his phone. He'd leave it on the kitchen counter while he showered, hand it to the girls to play games, let me use it to look up a recipe. Then, about 18 months ago, he changed his passcode. When I asked why, he said it was a company policy. Something about client confidentiality and encrypted communications. He said it so smoothly that I almost didn't notice the tiny flicker in his left eye. The third crack was the money. I handle the household bills. I've always been the one to balance the checkbook and review the credit card statements. Last spring, I noticed a series of cash withdrawals. $500 here, $800 there, sometimes $1,200, all from ATMs I didn't recognize. When I brought it up, Nathan got defensive for the first time. "Are you tracking my spending now?" he snapped. "I'm a grown man, Vivian. I have business expenses. I need cash for client dinners and parking." I backed off. I always backed off. That was my pattern. Ask a question, get a wall, retreat. I was so busy being a good wife that I forgot to be a smart one. The phone call came on a Thursday afternoon in mid-September. I was in my studio, surrounded by fabric samples and mood boards for a client's living room renovation. The girls were at school. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the dehumidifier. My phone buzzed. Unknown number, Portland area code. I almost let it go to voicemail. I wish I could say I had some premonition, some gut feeling that this call would change everything. But the truth is, I answered because I thought it might be the tile supplier calling about a backsplash order. "Mrs. Cole?" The voice was male, calm, and professional. "Speaking." My name is Dean Mercer. I'm a licensed private investigator based in Portland. Your husband, Nathan Cole, hired me 2 weeks ago to conduct surveillance on you. I set down the fabric sample I was holding. I'm sorry, what? He hired me to follow you. He believes you are having an affair, and he wants photographic evidence to use in a divorce filing. He specifically wants documentation that would support a claim of infidelity to gain full custody of your children and primary ownership of your marital assets. I stood perfectly still. The dehumidifier hummed. A bird sang outside the window. The world continued spinning as if nothing had happened, while inside my chest, something enormous was collapsing. Mrs. Cole, are you still there? Yes. Why are you telling me this? Because in 2 weeks of following you, I found absolutely no evidence of infidelity. You go to work, you pick up your kids, you go to the grocery store, you visit your mother on Wednesdays, and you go to yoga on Saturday mornings. The most scandalous thing I've documented is that you sometimes eat lunch alone in your car in the Trader Joe's parking lot. I let out a sound that was halfway between a laugh and a sob. However, Dean Mercer continued, and his voice dropped slightly. During the course of my investigation, I uncovered some information about your husband that I believe you need to know. I am under no legal obligation to share this with you. In fact, my contract with Mr. Cole explicitly prohibits it. But there are things I cannot, in good conscience, keep from you. My legs felt weak. I sat down on my work stool. What kind of things? Mrs. Cole, I think we should meet in person. This isn't a phone conversation. We met the next morning at a diner in Milwaukee, a blue-collar town south of Portland, where neither of us was likely to run into anyone we knew. The diner was the kind of place with sticky menus, bottomless coffee, and waitresses who called everyone honey. Dean Mercer was already seated in a corner booth when I arrived. He was in his early 50s, stocky, with close-cropped gray hair, and the watchful eyes of someone who had spent decades observing people who didn't want to be observed. He wore a plain navy jacket and no wedding ring. He stood when he saw me and extended a hand. Mrs. Cole, thank you for coming. I sat across from him. My hands were wrapped around my coffee cup, but I couldn't drink. My stomach was a knot of dread. Mr. Mercer, before you tell me anything, I need to understand something. Why are you doing this? You're betraying your client. Dean looked at me for a long moment. Then he reached into a worn leather satchel and pulled out a thick manila folder. I've been a PI for 27 years, Mrs. Cole. I've tailed cheating husbands, cheating wives, insurance fraudsters, and embezzlers. I've seen the worst of people. But in all those years, I've had one rule. I don't help predators destroy innocent people. He pushed the folder toward me. Your husband didn't hire me because he suspects you of cheating. He hired me because he needs you to be cheating. He needs a reason to divorce you that makes him look like the victim. Because if the real reason ever came out, he would lose everything. I stared at the folder. It was thick, at least 2 inches of paper. What's in there? Dean leaned back. 3 things. First, your husband has been maintaining a second household in Vancouver, Washington for the past 4 years. He has a woman there named Rachel Dunn and a 3-year-old son named Oliver. The diner seemed to tilt. I gripped the edge of the table. Dean continued, his voice steady and clinical. Second, your husband has been systematically diverting funds from Greystone Capital into a series of shell companies he controls. The total amount, based on what I've been able to trace, exceeds $2.3 million. Third, and this is the part that made me break my contract, your husband has recently taken out a $1.5 million life insurance policy on you. The beneficiary is not your children. It's a trust he set up 6 months ago, administered by Rachel Dunn. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. I sat in that vinyl booth in a diner in Milwaukee, Oregon, and felt the entire architecture of my life disintegrate into dust. Dean waited. He didn't rush me. He didn't offer platitudes. He just sat there, solid and patient, while I fell apart. When I finally found my voice, it came out as a whisper. "How do you know all this?" He opened the folder. The first section was photographs. Nathan entering a modest 2-story house in Vancouver. Nathan carrying a toddler on his hip. Nathan kissing a woman with auburn hair on the front porch. The photos were time-stamped. The most recent was from last Tuesday, the night Nathan told me he had a client dinner. The second section was financial documents, bank statements, wire transfer records, corporate filings for 3 shell companies. The money trail was complex but clear. Funds were moving from Greystone Capital through a series of intermediary accounts and ending up in Nathan's personal offshore holdings. The third section made my blood run cold. It was a copy of the life insurance application. My name, my date of birth, my social security number, my medical history. Nathan had filled it all out. The policy was issued by a company I had never heard of. The beneficiary was listed as the Cole Family Trust, which sounded innocuous until you read the trust documents, which named Rachel Dunn as the sole trustee. I pushed the folder away. I felt physically ill. "Mr. Mercer, I don't understand. If Nathan has money, another family, why does he need me dead?" "I didn't say he wants you dead," Dean said carefully. "I said the insurance policy is a red flag. It could be a financial play, a way to cash out if something happens to you. But combined with the fact that he's actively trying to fabricate grounds for divorce, and that he's been hiding millions in stolen money, the pattern is deeply concerning." "You think he's dangerous?" "I think he's desperate," Dean corrected. "Desperate people are unpredictable. I need to go to the police." "Not yet," Dean held up a hand. "If you go to the police right now, Nathan will know someone tipped you off. He'll destroy evidence, move money, and lawyer up before they can build a case. You need to be strategic." "Strategic? I'm an interior designer. I pick out throw pillows for a living." "You're also a mother of 2, Dean said, and his voice softened for the first time. "And from what I've seen over the past 2 weeks, you're a damn good one. Those girls need you to be smart right now, not fast." I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand. What do I do? Dean pulled a business card from his jacket and wrote a name on the back. "First, you called this woman. Her name is Sandra Chen. She's a family law attorney, one of the best in Oregon. She handles high-asset divorces, and she's dealt with cases involving financial fraud before. Second, you act completely normal. You don't confront Nathan, you don't change your routine, you don't Google anything suspicious on your home computer or shared devices. Buy a prepaid phone and use it for all communications with Sandra and me. Third, start quietly securing your personal documents. Birth certificates, social security cards, passports, medical records. Keep them somewhere Nathan can't access. A safe deposit box or a trusted friend's house. And fourth, Dean looked me dead in the eyes. Do not tell anyone. Not your mother, not your best friend, not your yoga instructor. One slip and Nathan will know. One slip and the evidence disappears. I drove home in a daze. The streets of Lake Oswego looked the same as they always did. Manicured lawns, American flags, kids on bicycles. But everything felt different, like I was seeing my neighborhood through a pane of warped glass. When I pulled into the driveway, Nathan's car was already there. He was home early. My heart hammered as I walked through the front door. He was in the kitchen, making grilled cheese for the girls. Classic dad move. The picture of domestic tranquility. "Hey, babe," he smiled at me over his shoulder. "You're just in time. I made extra." I set my keys on the counter and forced a smile. "Sounds great." I watched him flip the sandwiches with a spatula. those hands, the same hands that held our daughters, that touched my face, that signed a life insurance policy with my name on it, and another woman as the beneficiary. "Daddy, can I have mine with tomato?" Lily asked from the table. "Of course, sweetheart." He winked at her. I sat down at the table across from Sophie, who was drawing a picture of a cat with purple spots. "Look, Mommy, it's a magic cat." "It's beautiful, baby." I kissed the top of her head and breathed in the smell of her shampoo. In that moment, I made a decision. I would not fall apart. I would not run. I would not scream. I would do exactly what Dean said. I would be smart. And when the time came, I would be devastating. The next morning, I bought a prepaid phone at a Walgreens across town. I called Sandra Chen from the parking lot. She answered on the second ring. "Mrs. Cole." Dean briefed me. "How are you holding up?" "I'm functional," I said, which felt like the most honest answer I could give. "That's all I need you to be right now." Sandra's voice was warm but precise. "Here's what we're going to do." Over the next few weeks, Sandra and I built a case so quietly that Nathan never heard a whisper. Sandra subpoenaed financial records from Greystone Capital through a sealed court order, meaning the company was legally required to produce the documents, but couldn't tell Nathan about the request. She also retained a forensic accountant named Paul Weston, a former IRS investigator who could trace money through shell companies, the way a bloodhound tracks a scent. Paul was terrifying in the best possible way. He sat in Sandra's conference room with 3 monitors and a pot of black coffee, pulling threads that Nathan thought were invisible. Within 10 days, Paul had mapped the entire network. Nathan had created 3 shell companies: Cascade Consulting, LLC, Pacific Ridge Holdings, and Greenfield Advisory Group. None of them had real employees, real offices, or real clients. They existed solely to receive wire transfers from Greystone Capital, which Nathan authorized using his position as a senior financial consultant. The money flowed from Greystone to the shells, then to a brokerage account in the Cayman Islands, then back to the U.S. through a real estate investment fund that purchased the house in Vancouver, where Rachel Dunn lived. The total amount diverted over 4 years was $2.7 million, even more than Dean had initially estimated. Paul also discovered something else. Nathan wasn't just stealing from the company. He was stealing from his clients. 3 elderly investors had entrusted Nathan with their retirement savings. He had been skimming from their accounts for 2 years, covering the shortfalls with fabricated statements showing returns that didn't exist. It was a Ponzi scheme in miniature. When Paul showed me the numbers, I felt a rage so intense it was almost calm. Like the eye of a hurricane, perfectly still, surrounded by destruction. Meanwhile, I played the role of oblivious wife with an Oscar-worthy performance. I cooked dinner. I helped with homework. I smiled when Nathan came home late. I even initiated intimacy one night, which was the hardest thing I've ever done, because I needed him to believe that nothing had changed. One evening, about 3 weeks into our investigation, Nathan came home and sat down at the kitchen table with a heavy sigh. "Viv, we need to talk." My pulse spiked, but my face stayed serene. "What's wrong?" "I've been thinking about us," he said, rubbing his temples. "I feel like we've grown apart. I've been distant, and that's not fair to you." I put down the dish towel and sat across from him. "Is this about work?" "Partly." He looked at me with those blue eyes that I used to think were the color of honesty. "But it's also about us. I think maybe we should consider couples therapy." I almost choked. He was setting the stage. Couples therapy would create a paper trail showing he tried to save the marriage. It would make him look sympathetic in court. Sandra had warned me about this tactic. "I think that's a great idea," I said, smiling. Nathan looked relieved. He probably thought I was falling for it. "I'll find someone," he offered. Actually, I said, let me handle it. I know a great therapist through my yoga studio. I wanted to control who we saw. Sandra had already identified a therapist who specialized in high conflict divorces and could provide testimony if needed. Nathan agreed without hesitation. He was so confident in his own manipulation that it never occurred to him I might be playing the same game. The therapy sessions were surreal. We sat on opposite ends of a beige sofa in Dr. Rebecca Lynn's office, talking about communication styles and love languages. While I knew that the man sitting next to me had a secret son, $2.7 million in stolen money, and a life insurance policy that treated my death as a business opportunity. Nathan was brilliant in therapy. He cried. He said he felt disconnected. He blamed his workaholism and promised to change. Dr. Lynn nodded empathetically. I squeezed his hand. Inside, I was cataloging every lie for the record. During this period, Dean continued his surveillance. But now, instead of watching me, he was watching Nathan. He documented Nathan's weekly visits to Vancouver. He photographed Nathan dropping Oliver at daycare. He recorded Nathan and Rachel having dinner at a waterfront restaurant in the Pearl District, laughing and holding hands like newlyweds. Dean also discovered that Rachel Dunn was not the naive young woman I had imagined. She was 34, a former real estate agent who had been fired from 2 different agencies for forging documents. She had a prior conviction for check fraud in California, and she was fully aware that Nathan was married with children. In fact, according to text messages Dean obtained through legal channels, Rachel had been pressuring Nathan to accelerate the divorce. One text read, "When are you going to get rid of her? I'm tired of being your secret." Nathan had responded, "Soon. I just need the PI to get something on her first. Then we can take the house and the custody. I'll make sure she walks away with nothing." Reading that text felt like being stabbed with a very cold, very precise blade. He wasn't just cheating. He wasn't just stealing. He was engineering my complete destruction. He wanted to take my children, my home, and my financial security, and hand them to a woman with a criminal record. I showed the text to Sandra. She looked at them, then looked at me. "Vivian, do you want to destroy him?" "I want my children to be safe," I said. "I want the money he stole returned to his clients. And I want him to face consequences." "Good." Sandra closed the folder. "Then here's what we're going to do." The plan had 3 phases. Phase 1 was the financial case. Paul Weston had compiled a comprehensive forensic report documenting every fraudulent transaction, every shell company, every cent stolen from Greystone Capital and its clients. Sandra filed a sealed complaint with the Oregon Department of Justice, the SEC, and the FBI's Portland field office. The sealed filing meant that law enforcement could begin their investigation without alerting Nathan. Phase 2 was the family case. Sandra filed for a protective order and an emergency custody motion, supported by the private investigator's evidence, the life insurance policy, and Nathan's own text messages. The motion argued that Nathan posed a potential financial and physical threat to me and the children, given the insurance policy, the pattern of deception, and his stated intent to leave me with nothing. Phase 3 was the confrontation, and this was where Sandra earned every dollar of her fee. "We're not going to serve him papers at the office or at home," Sandra said. "We're going to do it at Greystone Capital's annual partner meeting, in front of his bosses, his colleagues, and his clients." I stared at her. "That's brutal." "He was planning to take your children and leave you destitute," Sandra replied without blinking. "Brutal is appropriate." The Greystone Capital annual partner meeting was held every October at the Sentinel Hotel in downtown Portland. It was a formal affair. Dark suits, expensive wine, keynote speeches about fiscal responsibility and client trust. The irony was almost too perfect. Sandra had contacted Greystone's general counsel and the managing partner separately, under attorney-client privilege, and informed them of the forensic evidence against Nathan. The managing partner, a man named Robert Ashworth, was initially skeptical. Then Paul Weston walked him through the numbers. By the end of the meeting, Ashworth's face was the color of wet cement. He agreed to cooperate fully. The night of the event, I dropped the girls at my mother's house. I told her I had a work function. She didn't ask questions. She could tell something was wrong, but my mother was the kind of woman who waited for you to come to her rather than pushing. It was one of the things I loved most about her. I drove to the Sentinel alone. I wore a black dress, simple but sharp. No jewelry except my wedding ring, which I deliberately left on. I wanted Nathan to see it when the world fell apart. The ballroom was glittering. Chandeliers cast warm light across tables set with white linen and crystal. About 200 people were present: clients, partners, financial advisors, and their spouses. Nathan was near the front, laughing with a group of senior partners. He looked immaculate. Tailored charcoal suit, silver cufflinks I had given him for his birthday, a glass of single malt in his hand. He was the picture of success. When he saw me, surprise flickered across his face. "Viv, what are you doing here?" I smiled. "You always said I should come to more work events. I wanted to show my support." His expression shifted from surprise to suspicion, then to a forced smile. "That's great, babe. Come, let me introduce you to some people." He put his hand on the small of my back, guiding me through the crowd. His palm was warm. I felt nothing. The keynote speech began at 8 p.m. Robert Ashworth took the stage, thanking clients and partners for a strong fiscal year. He spoke about integrity, transparency, and the sacred trust between a financial advisor and their clients. Every word was a setup, though only a handful of people in the room knew it. After the speech, Ashworth paused and cleared his throat. "Before we wrap up, I'd like to address an internal matter. As many of you know, Greystone Capital was founded on the principle that our clients' interests come first. Recently, it has come to our attention that this principle has been violated." Nathan's glass stopped halfway to his lips. Ashworth continued. "Our internal investigation, conducted in cooperation with federal authorities, has revealed that a senior member of our team has been systematically diverting client funds through a network of shell companies for personal enrichment. The total amount exceeds $2.7 million. The room went dead silent. Nathan set his glass down. His hand was trembling. At that moment, two men in dark suits walked through the ballroom doors. They were FBI agents. I knew because Sandra had briefed me. They approached Nathan with the calm, efficient professionalism of men who had done this many times before. "Nathan Cole," one of them said. "I'm Special Agent Ramos with the FBI. You are under arrest for wire fraud, securities fraud, and embezzlement. You have the right to remain silent." Nathan's face went through a transformation I will never forget. Confusion, denial, panic. And then, when his eyes found me across the room, a look of absolute, devastating recognition. He knew. In that single glance, he understood that the wife he had dismissed as harmless, the woman he had planned to discard like a used napkin, had been the architect of his downfall. As Agent Ramos cuffed Nathan's hands behind his back, Sandra Chen walked in from a side entrance. She carried a leather folio, which she opened and placed on the nearest table. "Nathan Cole," she said, loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. "I represent your wife, Vivian Cole. You are hereby served with a petition for divorce, an emergency motion for full custody of your minor children, and a civil complaint for fraud, misrepresentation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress." She placed the documents on the table beside his untouched dessert plate. Additionally, a protective order has been granted by Multnomah County Circuit Court. You are prohibited from coming within 500 feet of your wife, your children, or the family residence. Nathan looked at the papers, then at me. His face was gray. Vivian, he said, his voice cracking. I can explain. I walked up to him, close enough that only he could hear me. You hired a detective to prove I was cheating, so you could take everything from me. But I wasn't cheating, Nathan. I was just living my life, being a mother, running my business, trusting my husband. The detective you hired? He's the one who told me everything. About Rachel, about Oliver, about the shell companies, about the life insurance policy, where I'm worth more to you dead than alive. Nathan's mouth opened, but no sound came out. You wanted me to be the villain in your story, I said. But it turns out the villain was you all along. I stepped back. Agent Ramos led Nathan through the ballroom. Every eye in the room followed him. The partners, the clients, the spouses. 200 people watched Nathan Cole walk out in handcuffs, and the silence was so complete you could hear the clink of his cufflinks against the metal restraints. I didn't watch him leave. I turned to Sandra, who handed me a glass of water. How do you feel? She asked. I took a sip. Ask me tomorrow. That night, I picked up the girls from my mother's house. They were asleep in the back seat as I drove home. The streets were quiet. The rain had stopped and the moon was out, casting silver light on the wet pavement. I carried Lily inside first, then Sophie. I tucked them into their beds, kissed their foreheads, and stood in the hallway between their rooms, listening to them breathe. Then I went to the kitchen, sat at the table where Nathan had made grilled cheese 3 weeks ago, and cried until there was nothing left. The aftermath unfolded over the following months with the relentless precision of falling dominoes. Nathan was denied bail due to flight risk. The judge noted the offshore accounts in the second household as evidence that he had both the means and the motivation to flee. He sat in the Multnomah County Detention Center while his court-appointed attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal. Greystone Capital launched a full internal audit. The 3 elderly clients Nathan had been defrauding were notified and immediately filed civil suits. One of them, a retired teacher named Margaret Hollis, had lost $340,000 of her retirement savings. When I read about her in the Oregonian, I called Sandra. Can I help her? I asked. Sandra paused. You want to help the woman your husband stole from? She's 74 years old, and she lost her retirement, Sandra. Yes, I want to help her. Sandra connected me with Margaret's attorney, and I agreed to testify in her civil case against Greystone Capital. The firm's insurance would cover the losses, but my testimony helped accelerate the settlement. Margaret called me after the case was resolved. Mrs. Cole, I just want to thank you. I know this couldn't have been easy. Mrs. Hollis, my husband stole from you. The least I can do is help make it right. She was quiet for a moment. You're a good woman, Vivian. Your girls are lucky. That phone call meant more to me than any court victory. Meanwhile, Rachel Dunn's world was imploding. With Nathan in jail and his assets frozen, the house in Vancouver was seized by federal authorities as proceeds of fraud. Rachel was evicted. She tried to hire an attorney to claim common-law spousal rights, but no one would take the case. She had known Nathan was married. She had known the money was stolen, and her own criminal record made her a terrible witness. She texted me once, from a number I didn't recognize. This is Rachel. I know you hate me, but Oliver is Nathan's son. He deserves to know his father. I showed the text to Sandra, who advised me not to respond, but I thought about it for a long time. Oliver was a 3-year-old boy. He hadn't chosen any of this. His father was a criminal and his mother was complicit, but he was innocent. I didn't respond to Rachel, but I told Sandra that if paternity was ever legally established, I would not oppose Oliver having a supervised relationship with Nathan after he served his sentence. I did it for the boy, not for Rachel. Some battles you fight with fury, others you fight with grace. Knowing the difference is what separates justice from revenge. The divorce was finalized 4 months after Nathan's arrest. The terms were comprehensive. I received full custody of Lily and Sophie. Nathan was granted no visitation rights pending the outcome of his criminal case and a psychological evaluation. The family home was awarded to me. All marital assets, minus those frozen by the federal government, were divided in my favor. Nathan's retirement accounts, which he had been secretly depleting, were partially restored through the civil settlement with Greystone. Sandra also secured a provision that any future income Nathan earned after his release would be subject to child support and restitution obligations. He would be paying for what he did for the rest of his working life. The day the divorce was finalized, I sat in Sandra's office and signed the last document. My hand didn't shake. Sandra looked at me over her reading glasses. You know, most clients in your situation would have folded. The pressure, the fear, the betrayal. 90% of people would have confronted their husband the day they found out and lost all their leverage. I thought about Dean Mercer's phone call. The diner in Milwaukee, the manila folder. I had a good team, I said, and a detective with a conscience. Sandra smiled. Don't sell yourself short, Vivian. The team only works if the client has the strength to trust the process. And you did that while cooking dinner, helping with homework, and pretending to love a man who was plotting against you. That takes a kind of courage most people can't even imagine. After Sandra's office, I drove to the diner in Milwaukee. I hadn't been back since that first meeting with Dean. The same waitress was there, the one who called everyone honey. I ordered coffee and a slice of pie and sat in the same corner booth. My phone buzzed. It was Dean. Heard the divorce went through. Congratulations. I typed back, thank you, Dean, for everything. You could have just collected your fee from Nathan and walked away. Nobody would have known. His reply came a few seconds later. I would have known. I stared at those 4 words for a long time. In a world full of people who justify their silence, Dean Mercer chose to speak. He broke his contract, risked his reputation, and potentially his safety, because he looked at the evidence and decided that doing the right thing mattered more than doing the profitable thing. I left a $50 tip on a $7 check and drove home. The house was quiet when I got there. My mother had picked up the girls from school and taken them to the park. I stood in the kitchen, in the exact spot where Nathan used to stand when he made breakfast. The spatula was still in the same drawer. The cutting board still had a burn mark from the time he left the stove on. I opened the refrigerator. Inside was the usual chaos of a household with 2 kids. Juice boxes, string cheese, leftover pasta, a half-eaten yogurt with a spoon still in it. Normal life. Messy, imperfect, gloriously ordinary life. I closed the refrigerator and walked to my studio. The fabric samples were still spread across the work table. The mood board for the client's living room was pinned to the wall. I sat down at my desk and picked up my pencil. There was work to do. Nathan's sentencing hearing was held on a gray Tuesday in January. The courtroom was half full, mostly journalists and a few Greystone employees. Margaret Hollis was there, sitting in the front row with her daughter. I sat in the back. I didn't want to be noticed. The federal prosecutor laid out the case methodically. $2.7 million in embezzled funds, 3 defrauded elderly clients, a network of shell companies, an offshore brokerage account, a double life maintained for 4 years through systematic deception. Nathan stood before the judge in an orange jumpsuit. He had lost weight. His hair was longer than he ever would have allowed it to be. He looked diminished, like a photograph that had been left in the sun too long. His attorney made a plea for leniency, citing Nathan's lack of prior criminal record and his cooperation with investigators after his arrest. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Patricia Yamamoto, was unimpressed. "Mr. Cole," she said, looking at him over her glasses, "you were entrusted with people's life savings. People who trusted you because you wore a nice suit and spoke with confidence. You betrayed that trust systematically, deliberately, and without remorse. You stole from the elderly. You lied to your employer. You maintained a fraudulent second family. And you attempted to frame your own wife for infidelity, to steal her home and her children." She paused. "This court has seen many cases of financial fraud. Yours stands out not for its sophistication, but for its cruelty." Nathan was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison, with the possibility of parole after 5. He was also ordered to pay full restitution to Greystone Capital and its affected clients, plus $150,000 in civil damages to me. As the bailiff led him away, Nathan turned and scanned the courtroom. His eyes found me in the last row. He didn't say anything. He just looked at me with an expression I couldn't fully read. It might have been regret. It might have been resentment. It might have been the dawning realization that the woman he had underestimated for 12 years had been the one to bring him down. I held his gaze for 3 seconds. Then I stood up and walked out. The hallway was bright with fluorescent light. My heels echoed on the linoleum. Outside, the air was sharp and clean, and it had started to rain, because Portland in January has no other setting. I stood under the courthouse overhang and watched the rain fall on the parking lot. A year ago, I was a woman who backed off every time her husband raised his voice. A woman who ignored cash withdrawals in late nights and changed passcodes because confrontation was scarier than ignorance. Now I was standing in the rain outside a federal courthouse, having just watched that same husband get sentenced to prison, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not vindication, not triumph, just clarity. The unbearable, beautiful clarity of knowing exactly who you are and what you're willing to fight for. I drove home and picked up the girls from my mother's house. On the way back, Lily asked me a question from the back seat. "Mom, is Dad ever coming home?" I looked at her in the rearview mirror. Her eyes were wide and serious. She was 10, old enough to sense that something seismic had shifted, but still young enough to hope it could be fixed. "Honey," I said carefully, "Dad made some very bad choices, and he has to go away for a while. It's not your fault, and it's not Sophie's fault. It's something between the grown-ups. Will he come back? Maybe someday, but right now our family is you, me, and Sophie, and we're going to be okay." Lily was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Mom, you're really brave." I looked at my daughter in the mirror. She was staring at me with an expression of pure, uncomplicated love. "I'm not brave, baby. I'm just your mom." "That's the same thing," she said. I had to pull over because I couldn't see the road through my tears. 6 months after the sentencing, my life had settled into a new rhythm. I expanded my interior design studio and hired 2 junior designers. We landed a contract to redesign the lobby and common areas of a boutique hotel in the Pearl District. It was the biggest project I had ever taken on, and I threw myself into it with an energy that surprised even me. Lily joined the school debate team and won her first tournament. Sophie started painting with watercolors, and one of her pieces, a purple cat with spots, was selected for the school art show. My mother started coming over for dinner every Sunday. She made her famous pot roast and told the girls stories about their grandfather, who had been a carpenter. One Sunday, after the girls were in bed, my mother and I sat on the back porch with glasses of wine. The night air was cool and smelled like wet earth and pine. "You know," she said, I always worried about you. I looked at her. Why? Because you were always so eager to make everyone happy. She took a sip of wine. Your father was like that too. He'd bend over backwards for people who didn't deserve it. I was afraid you'd marry someone who would take advantage of that. I stared at my wine glass. You were right. She shook her head. No, I was right about Nathan, but I was wrong about you. I thought being kind made you weak. Turns out, it just made you patient. And when you finally decided to fight, you were unstoppable. I leaned my head on her shoulder. The stars were out, which was rare for Oregon. We sat there in comfortable silence, two women who had both loved and lost and survived. A year after the divorce, I received an unexpected package in the mail. It was from Dean Mercer. Inside was a small box and a handwritten note. Mrs. Cole, I'm retiring. 27 years is enough. I wanted you to know that your case is the one I'm most proud of. Not because of the outcome, but because you reminded me why I got into this work in the first place. Enclosed is something I found during the investigation that I think belongs to you. Dean. I opened the box. Inside was a small, weathered photograph. It showed a young couple standing in front of a Christmas tree. The woman was laughing, her head thrown back. The man was looking at her like she was the only person in the world. It was Nathan and me. Our first Christmas together, 13 years ago. I don't know how Dean found it. Maybe it was in Nathan's desk at Greystone, or in the Vancouver house, or in some file he kept for reasons only he understood. I looked at the photo for a long time. Then I put it in a drawer. Not because I wanted to forget, but because some memories deserve to rest. They don't need to be displayed or destroyed. They just need a quiet place to sit, alongside the person you used to be, before you became the person you were always meant to be. If you take anything from my story, let it be this. Trust your instincts. When something feels wrong, it is wrong. The leak in the ceiling doesn't fix itself. It just gets bigger until the whole roof caves in. Second, keep your own records. Know your finances. Read every document. Never let anyone, not a husband, not a mother-in-law, not a boss, tell you that the money is not your concern. Third, when someone shows you who they are, believe them. Not the version they perform in therapy or at the dinner table. The version that shows up in bank statements, text messages, and the way they treat you when no one is watching. And finally, if a stranger ever calls you and tells you something that could save your life, listen. Because sometimes the people who rescue you aren't the ones who promise to love you. They're the ones who simply chose to do the right thing.